Hi, everyone. Welcome to Craft Politics. I'm Joseph Lavoie.
I'm Andrew Percy.
And Andrew, it's nice of you to dress up for the
I'm in a bit of a mess
podcast.
because I've driven back. I'm in England still, and I've driven from London to Yorkshire, God's own country. But I got back to my house in Yorkshire to find no heating, no hot water. So I've literally had to light a fire with firewood. That's like, very rustic of me. I'm a survivor. And then my house is just like, I just had to do all sorts. So I'm an absolute mess. And it took me 5 hours plus to get back from London because London traffic. And yeah, so I'm a little bit frazzled at the moment. And then you can't even relax and just catch up on the news because that's even more frazzling. So I actually need the beer we're going to have. Yeah. And the good thing for me is it is 9:20 at night, so I can actually down this beer, get properly trashed, and then actually I can't because we've got an 11 p.m. meeting, haven't we?
Yeah, I was going to say easy now. Correct, but
I look a mess. I'm sorry.
For the first time in a long time, you are drinking at an appropriate hour. So what are you drinking? We're not drinking the same beer this week because we are oceans apart.
I'm on an English beer, Beak, and it's a WOS IPA, WOS. But Beak are a really good brewery. Actually, one of the boys from the beer club you came to left this in my fridge. So this will be a test of whether or not they listen to our podcast because I'm drinking their beers.
Well, here's another test. I'm drinking my beer in a glass that they gifted us at that same session.
Verdant glass.
So I'm going to be drinking out of a Verdant Brewing Co. glass, and I am drinking a Velvet Porter from Strange Fellas, which is
Strange Fellas.
Yeah, Strange Fellas. It is labeled as rich, smooth, and bourbon. So I don't know whether they use actual Kentucky bourbon or bourbon barrels in the beer. Just to be on the safe side, I thought since today the tariffs are live, I would void my fridge of anything that had a semblance of Americana in it.
I was about to drag you out into the streets and label you a traitor.
Yeah.
Because we can't have any bourbon now. Nothing. People need to just buy good old English, Scotch, and Welsh whiskey, right?
Yes.
And Irish.
And people just need to, I do think it's an appropriate way to take in today. So we are recording this on Tuesday, March 4th. I think it's important for us to note that because, as you've said, every single time any one of us opens up the news feed now, there's just something else that's broken, something else that's changed, something else that's moved. So by the time this pod gets released, it's possible that everything we've said is completely out of date, and that is just bonkers to me. Absolutely bonkers.
It's actually hard, we're having a bit of banter starting this, but it's actually hard to do that at the moment because it is just so utterly crazy. I mean, this is, I am actually lost for words. When you saw the Zelensky stuff last week and just everything is just, it's, the end of the Western alliance, right? Those are like, very
absolute collapse. I mean, I landed off. I wrote about this on the weekend. I landed on my flight back from London. Same thing. Opened up my iPhone, looked at the news, and then saw the video of that now famous Oval Office meeting between Ukraine President Zelensky and U.S. President Donald Trump, and it's just not something we've ever seen, or at least I can't recall in modern history seeing something like this, and I found it just absolutely frustrating and depressing. One, I've already stated my prejudices on the show that I cannot stand Donald Trump, at least on a personal level. I find him absolutely grating. So having to sit there and watch him be this petulant fucking little child on such a serious issue as Ukraine, as serious of an issue as the growing influence that he appears to be under of Russian propaganda and seeming to be at the beck and call of Vladimir Putin is absolutely soul-crushing because, as you've said, it is a fundamental reshaping of the global order that we've had post-World War II.
Totally. And actually, Trump wasn't the one who pissed me off the most in that. I mean, J.D. Vance... I mean, he did the same when Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, was there the week before, where he started chiming in to a press conference, to a sit down. It's not quite a formal press conference, but between the president of a country, head of a government of one country, and the prime minister of another, the head of government of another country, and then you have this fucking petulant child, chiming in from the side, and he did it to Starmer. He said, Britain and free speech. These are the guys who tell you constantly no one's allowed to interfere in America because that's outrageous and disgusting, but they're able to have offer commentary on every other nation on the planet. And he did it to Starmer. I mean, only on one thing, and Starmer actually, in fairness, dealt with it okay. But to Zelensky, I was like, I couldn't believe what I was watching. It was, I mean, it's just, this is fucking, it's, and the worst thing about it is, leave all the, stupid narcissistic tendencies of these fucking characters. It's actually that they have decided to declare war on their friends, on the people who, I think I said this before on previous ones, we have an interest in the Western democracies in keeping America strong and in American hegemony, right? We have an interest in that. And it's in America's interest. We're all aligned. And these people have decided, with what appears to be, so far as I can tell, quite a lot of support amongst the American public, to declare war on their friends and their allies, and to do so in their most insulting and offensive fucking way as well. I mean, I'm sorry to use so many F words, but as somebody we've talked about this before, I love America, and, America is, the thing that has kept Western values alive, right? Because it's had the might and the power to do that. And here they are declaring war on all of us. It defies any logic. It's just mind-numbing idiocy. And I keep trying to think, what's the logic? There must be something that I'm missing.
I think everyone's asking themselves that
I need
question.
to drink more.
I was asked just an hour ago, I was asked my opinion, do I think that this is some grand ploy on Trump and Vance's part to completely disrupt things in the first 100 days, maybe the first 200-300 days, so you reset the benchmark on what is considered sane or normal behavior. And so is it that they got some grand design where they're gonna take everything to an extreme so that they can bring, when they start to renegotiate on all these things and they settle down, they don't settle down to the floor that is the current status quo, they settle down to something above. For example, is going crazy on tariffs on us today. So today is the day we're recording this. The tariffs against Canada are now live, 25% across the board, 10% on energy. Is that so that we have a total freak out, and when we find, if we can get to a place of renegotiating with them, we get to a place where instead of being 25%, it's 10%, and we all go, oh, well, thank God it's only 10% compared to 25%. We'll take that. Whereas if we are going from 0 to 10, we should be having the exact same reaction we have today. Obviously, it's not as intense as a 25% tariff, but it's still a reshaping of the status quo. My response to that question was that assumes a level of rationality. I don't know that these guys, this administration, has that level of rationality. And I get the sense they're just making shit up as they go, day by day, and all they care about is constant conflict. I heard someone else make this point, sorry, and that's my turn around, but I heard someone else make this point last week, which is, when you think about it, right, what catapulted Trump into sort of stardom was his role as a reality TV host. And reality TV and media is just constant conflict, right? And that's how he made his brand. So is he just perpetually looking for ways to stay in the headlines, to drive news, and the best way, or the most familiar way he knows how to do that, is to drive conflict, and he doesn't give a flying fuck if that includes his closest friends and allies.
But, I mean, again, all buds to the question of to what end. I mean, I could understand if it was his first term and he thought this was electorally popular, but this is supposed to be his last term, although, I start to question whether there isn't something else going on here. But then I find myself, like Dave the conspiracy theorist who's online doing whatever, right? I don't want to become one of those. But you even find yourself questioning, is this guy actually a Russian asset? All these conspiracy theorists who have
what does Putin have on this guy?
Yeah, because none of it makes any sense. I mean, I tried to have this argument with some of my American friends who were quite pro him. I think they've changed a bit now. But, it's like, this guy is siding it with Russia and Putin, who definitely wants to see America damaged, and declaring war on his friends who don't want to see America damaged, because we all have an interest in, and you just can't help but ask the question, what the fuck do these guys have on him?
And the crazy part is, and Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau, in their respective responses to this on the Canadian side with respect to the tariffs, had an appeal to Americans, which is to say, like, this is going to hurt you just as much as it's going to hurt us. And I think what he's like, there's something about all of this. He's losing, Trump that is losing sight of the fact that there are actual downstream consequences for voters, like the very people he needs to keep on side, or at least that the Make America Great movement needs to keep on side. And I don't know if consumers can handle 4 years of this type of pressure. Like, presumably, we're going to see inflationary effects of this. People are not going to be able to afford to put as many presents under the Christmas tree come Christmas time. Cost of gas is going to go up. Like, it's just going to be really expensive, much more expensive in many parts of America to be in this operating environment. And I don't know that he's given that any thought.
I don't. It doesn't feel like it. But at the same time, where are the voices? Where are the voices against this on his own side? I mean, the most. I thought the person who debased themselves the most was Lindsey Graham when he, came out and did a press conference saying, Zelensky's behaved appallingly, Zelensky should resign. I mean, Lindsey Graham, a guy who previously, was a never Trumper. I think that's right. He wasn't he? He was really mocking of Trump. Then became a Trumper, was one of the biggest advocates for support for Ukraine in the Senate. And then these people are just debasing themselves. People I expected, whether you expect better from Lindsey Graham, I don't know. But similarly, when we were down at the IDU in December, I bumped into a couple of Republican congressmen I know, and I said, "Look, this 25% thing." They said, "No, it's not going to be that. It's just a negotiating tactic." These are, and actually, I texted quite a few of my Republican mates in the States, and one of them, and these are all people who work in or around politics there in various levels, and one of them said to me, "I want to move to the UK." It's like, and this is somebody just these, but they don't say anything. And this is the thing I think is most frightening about all of this is, like, you can't. People seem to be afraid to say anything because he'll come for you, and his supporters will come for you, and we're kind of like we're getting to that point of, okay, well, where is the democracy here? Because in democracy we have, but these. But I'm just not hearing the voices. Where are they? And it's clearly not, if you had Republican congressmen telling us in December that, oh, no, none of this is ever going to happen. And now here we are, those guys are not involved in any of this. They're so far removed from it. They're just, kind of willing or unwilling travelers who seem to be keeping their gob shut.
Well, they seem to, we saw this J.D. Vance, right? J.D. Vance at one point was a no Trumper, who's now obviously his most... his loudest shill. I wonder if there's just a sense that, at least for now, he remains. They might feel that he remains extremely popular. That he's got a grip on this strain of Republican movement, and that they kind of have to just line up and go along with this for a little while and see what comes of it. I don't know how sustainable this is for a 4-year term. I don't know if you had this realization this morning when you woke up, but I'm like, it hasn't even been 100 days of us dealing with this guy, and we're already all exhausted by it. It feels like it's been an eternity. I have no idea how we put up with this for the next 4 years, and I wonder if at some point there is just a larger whiplash effect that kicks in. Do his own voters get kind of tired of this? Because there's only so much level of intensity of this kind that people have the tolerance to put up with. So they'll either tune out or they'll just completely whiplash and go the other way. And so maybe there's some hope that the pendulum will swing, although I'm not being particularly hopeful today on any of this stuff. But I wanted to ask you, Percy, because when we were in London last week, a lot of the headlines there were on British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's Oval Office visit, and certainly the international media seemed to think that he handled that pretty well. A suave move by surprising Trump with a letter of invitation for a state visit from King Charles, and everyone's like, okay, maybe here's one leader from the West that's kind of figured out maybe how to handle Trump. If you fast forward a couple days, it seems like, well, that was probably only short-lived because Starmer would have been caught completely surprised by Trump yanking all support for Ukraine. Let's come back to that in a second. But one of the reactions that I noticed when I came back to Canada in reaction to the Starmer visit, particularly the letter from King Charles inviting Trump to the White House, is a lot of Canadians, particularly small R Republicans, as in those who have problems with the monarchy, are like, what the fuck? How is it that our own head of state, King Charles, will agree to host Donald Trump on the eve of him screwing us over with tariffs? I find that is an interesting angle on this. Do you think that is something that Starmer would have thought through before going?
Well, look, there's two ways you can look at that. There is one. For a start, the first thing Starmer. Well, we'll come back to the Starmer-Trump thing in a moment. But on this particular one, because I've seen commentary on this, and I actually defended Starmer on this because lots of things that happen at international levels of diplomacy, we don't see what's going on behind. So it could well be the case that the approach that Starmer had taken will have been agreed in lockstep with other leaders. It certainly was agreed with other leaders in Europe, possibly even with Trudeau. I don't know on that, but it is. They're clearly world lead. Trudeau and Starmer obviously speak a lot. Trudeau was over for the summit that Starmer organised in London this weekend. Bringing Zelensky straight over. There was the big embrace, all the rest of it. And Trudeau, of course, went to see the King. So look, I suspect that there's a lot of diplomatic stuff going on in the background where the world community, those of us who are allies, are trying to work out what the approaches are, and that will mean people try different approaches with Trump. You had Macron doing his bit, you had Starmer doing his, with a view to trying to work this guy out and work with this guy. That's perhaps an overly generous way of thinking about it, but certainly, when you're talking to allies, there will be some coordination on that. On the issue of the King, I find that a bit unfair on the King, right? Because the King is the separate head of state. When he's the head of state of Canada, the British government has nothing to do with his role. They don't tell him what to say in relation to Canada. If the Canadian Prime Minister wanted the King to put out a statement about Canadian sovereignty, that would be for Ottawa to tell the King to do it. And they could do that tomorrow because the King acts independently. The British government has no say over that. So the British government has decided to clearly use the one thing that we know Trump seems to have a fascination with, which is these kind of the royal family, royal visits, to try and use that to bring the guy in. So there's clearly a couple of things going on in which the Brits and the Europeans, various different ones, have been trying to do this. Let's try and draw him in. Let's see if we can find a way of a route to him that allows us to exercise some influence over him. That looks like that can be interpreted as it's casting Canada aside. I don't think that's the case. I think it's all part of the international community trying to, through different routes, figure this out. Yeah. So I would be generous to the government in that respect because, I would have liked to have seen Starmer when the 51st state question came up to have said, look, Canada is a Commonwealth country with a shared head of state and one of our most valued allies. Maybe that would have opened up Trump to say a whole load of other stuff. So maybe they're just shutting it down and moving on. Because you can see what happens when you try and have a debate with him.
Try and confront him. He goes as crazy as he did with Zelensky.
The whole thing just goes off on a tangent, which can make the whole thing worse. So, I think that I get the interpretation, but look, the Trudeau went to see the King while he was in London, and the King could have issued a statement afterwards if Trudeau had instructed him to. If Trudeau had said to him, as head of state of Canada, I want you to say the following. I suspect they've not asked him to, or I suspect the decision's been taken not to involve the King on that element of it at this stage.
Maybe save the King for a later moment. Yeah.
Yes, of course, because the King's going to, actually, Trump is going to come and see the King, and at that point there will be, one would presume, some commentary around this. So it's frustrating because I do see what you really want is, but there's a lot of moving parts here, which will be done in coordination, and we won't necessarily see the coordination.
It's a good point, Percy. I think the other thing for us to keep in mind is no one has figured out this puzzle right now. Right? Everyone's trying to figure out what's going to work. How do you negotiate with this guy? No one's got a clear blueprint, a roadmap, or anything. So we've seen right now that nothing really seems to be working. Yeah. And so let's give Starmer the benefit of the doubt. He was trying to figure out how to make this work. And if he could make it work, maybe he could leverage that down the road for some of his allies.
Yes, because, the relationship Trump-Trudeau is a completely broken, destroyed relationship, right? That's gone. So you have Macron and Starmer on behalf of the rest of the Western Alliance trying to figure a route out to this guy, right? So Macron went and did his bit, Starmer went and did his. Starmer, I think, was actually marginally more successful than Macron, which you would be surprised about given how polar apart they are. I mean, there is a little bit of me as a British Conservative thinks that when Theresa May went over to try to do this with Trump very early on as well, with some success actually, she was the first Ronnie to go, the Labour opposition were up in arms about the fact that we were spending any time trying to talk to this guy. And now here they are in government doing and going even further than we did. But that is just the realpolitik of it, right?
Yeah.
So I give Starmer a bit of thing on that. But however, if this continues, at some point, the way the West responds is going to have to change. It's all very well building a relationship. So everybody in Britain always looks at that. Can you build the Blair-Bush, the Thatcher-Reagan relationship, and others before, I think Harold Wilson and I think, was it Harold Wilson, Jeff? I can't remember which one, but we tend to have these good relations. But in all of those relationships, the junior partner, the British Prime Minister, was able to exercise influence. So it was a relationship that it was worth Britain investing in very heavily. Thatcher literally did, berate Reagan and, she exerted influence over him. The question we'll have to ask in lots of our countries, the question in Britain will be, if Starmer is unable to exert any influence, what is the point of, giving this guy these things if we're not going to get anywhere?
Yeah.
And, you saw very quickly afterwards, as I said, the Starmer organised that conference here in London. Zelensky was brought over, I think, the very next day, big hugs. That's sending a very clear message to Trump. Trudeau was in for that.
Yeah, it seems like the West is going to have to, as you just highlighted, it's already happening. He's going to have to reorient to a West minus U.S., right?
Yes. Well,
the U.S. is going to be its own little hegemony. The West is going to have to organize itself and get creative about what that looks like.
So here's a question.
Yeah.
If Russian troops march into one of the Baltic states tomorrow, NATO, of course, we have Article 5, is it, where we're all attack on one is an attack on all of us.
Not anymore.
Does America trigger that?
No. So, this is what I wrote about on the weekend. I wrote this piece and I published it called NATO is Dead. I just have no confidence that in that scenario that the U.S. steps up and defends Lithuania or whatever. So NATO, as we've understood up until this point, I think is dead. I don't see a scenario in which the U.S. is a reliable partner in that arrangement anymore. And so, how do we reshape NATO?
I think that's one of the things that absolutely boils my piss in all of this is when you hear these American politicians talking about, how they have defended everybody else and all their boys and girls. Do you know what? There's an awful lot of American dead on European soil for which Europe is immeasurably grateful and always will and always should be. But there are also a lot of dead Europeans. And there are a lot of dead Canadians and Australians and New Zealanders and many other allied troops who are also dead in the same way, defending not just Europe, but actually defending our values. There's values of, and as I think I put on something I wrote, like European security is American security. And just the way that these politicians, you see them casually, like J.D. Vance today talking about, as a peacekeeping force, you don't want it from 20,000 troops from some random country that's not fought a war for 30 or 40 years. Well, the troops that we were proposing would be British and French troops very heavily. We fought a lot of wars in the last 30 or 40 years, most of them alongside Americans.
Yeah.
And our boys and girls have died alongside those American troops. And it's so insulting the way in which, this language is used as if, there's nobody else's boys and girls have ever gone off to war to defend anything. And it's all been burdened by America. America's taken a huge burden, of course. But, because...
It's just we have a stooge for Putin as president, and that's what enables this kind of view on the world. And anyway, so now we have this is supposed to be cheeky half, so we're supposed to try and keep this short.
Well, just one thing to finish there. I think a slight difference is you do feel it more, I think, even in Britain. Certainly on continental Europe, I suspect even more. Britain got bombed to shit in World War II, but we haven't been successfully invaded for 1,000 years or whatever. Europeans have, and those borders of their countries have changed very significantly. So perhaps it's felt more there. But I did find, wandering around, catching up with some of my former and current colleagues who are still MPs, a number of them who were really depressed and said to me, we're going to have a war, aren't we? And I was quite surprised. I think it feels much more real here on that front. I mean, I think Canadians are waking up to that as well. And, there's this real sense that the Western alliance is dead, and that's dangerous for us. And that's a thoroughly depressing thought to start talking about. But
kidding.
I just said what's come of America. What has come of America? Like, that great, fantastic, democratic experiment. What's become of it? That it's now people by fucking Donald Trump and his little bully boy tosspot, J.D. Vance. I mean, it's just utter.
And you and I are we're not alone. There's many of us in Canada, many of us in the UK, in Europe, who have for so long been some of the staunchest pro-American foreigners. Like I've been so, as you talked about at the top of the podcast, like I'm so pro-America. I'm always defending America. And if you're losing people like me, people like you, it's just not a good place to be in. And I wonder how permanent the damage is. I mean, the West is going to have to reorganize, restructure some of its fundamental institutions. I think that's actually probably a good thing because we all became way too fucking dependent on the U.S. So fine, we're going to refigure out NATO. We're going to refigure out what national defense looks like on a domestic level, country by country. Those are probably all things that we should be doing. But I don't know that we can ever. I don't know how long it'll take for us to overcome the trust issue that we're going to have. Certainly while this guy's president, and I think it'll have lingering effects because we saw it. Right, it's not like Biden completely undid what Trump did in his term on some of these core issues. So I don't imagine that even as a change in government, that we're going to see like a fundamental. We're not going to go back to 2008 or 2001. Like it'll be a rollback if we're lucky to 2024, 2025. Yeah. So like we got to figure out how to make this work without the U.S. And that's
you're only one election away from whatever. You felt whether it was Reagan, whether it was Carter, whether it was JFK, whether it was Nixon, whether it was the Bushes, whether it was Clinton, you just knew Obama. You knew that America had your back, had the back of the West, right? We all knew that. Whereas now, I mean, although Obama, in fairness, I think, there are lots of things that you can blame various US presidents in walking away from in the last decade or two, which have sown the seeds for some of this. However, they were all we knew which side they were on, right? We didn't question them. Whoever was in the White House, you didn't question that. They were kind of our guy, right? They were sort of our guy. Now you're like, that's potentially their guy. And that's a really frightening thought. And just to end there, though, I mean, we shouldn't pretend it's all just in America this sentiment exists. I mean, this sentiment exists in parts of Europe as well. And across the West, you see even within the EU, there's an argument over some of the support for Ukraine. It's weaker in some countries than others. There are political movements which are very influenced by Russia. And so it's not a uniquely American thing. The fact is it matters a heck of a lot more when it's the White House.
Yeah, where, you're on a continent, or sorry, the rest of Europe is on a continent where borders can get redrawn instantly because Putin and Trump have decided, well, that's what they want. And it's not a lovely proposition.
No,
that is it.
But
so we now have to tonight watch this guy give an address to Congress, and he went on social and said, "I will tell it like it is," all caps. His spokesperson has said this is going to be must-see TV. She told Fox News that the address will, quote, celebrate his extraordinarily successful first month in office while outlining his bold, ambitious, and common sense vision for the future, close quote. If common sense means taxing your own consumers and businesses with tariffs, I don't understand.
And trotting out the rhetoric of your sworn enemies.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I just know what's going to happen. I'm going to watch this thing. It's going to be cringeworthy. I'm going to want to throw shit at the screen. It's going to be, but I suppose we have to do that because that's the business we're in. And if we're going to try and close this out, Andrew, we'll finish by maybe talking about something less depressing, which is what we think of these beers. However,
I do just on that though. I mean, the thing that goes through my head is he going to announce something to do with NATO? You just can't. The fact that you even think that.
If he just decides on a whim to pull all support for Ukraine, you're right. Does he say we're done with NATO, or every country's got to do 5% GDP contribution?
Or this is it. I'm putting them on notice. 5% or we're out.
Yeah. Well, you're right.
Anyway,
it's going to be something insane like that.
Enough to make you want to drink. So tell me about your beer.
Well, sorry. Before we get on the beer, one last thing I'll say is because sometimes we do want to make this relevant to people or to some of our listeners who have to deal with this on the day in, day out. If there's one little practical thing I have coming out of this week is, and I know many of our listeners are already doing this, but you have to redraw your risk matrix.
Yes,
for
totally.
your organization, and anything that touches U.S. politics. Anything that's got the word Trump on it in that list, it's got to go from being maybe unlikely, potentially. Everything is now potentially high likely and potentially incredibly high risk, and you got to start planning accordingly. And so, a lot of work for some people coming down the road. So if you're going to have to be stuck doing that work late night, long hours, sometimes doing it over beer is good. So, yes, you tell us first, Percy, what do you think of your beer?
I swear a lot more when I'm in Yorkshire and it's later. So, or maybe it's just Trump and his little tosspot sidekick. But anyway, I'm on this Beak one, which is a really good beer. It's Citra Luminosa, which I don't really have very often, the Motueka. But it's actually really nice. It's Beak is a really good brewery.
Where are they based? Do you know?
I think, are they Cheltenham? I can't remember. I'll have to... Hang on, where are they? They are Lewis on the south coast. I did know that. So Sussex, I think Sussex, yeah. But it's just really nice. It's very creamy. You get the lovely. It's creamy, but you also absolutely get. Now, what should I get from Luminosa? Because I don't really know that hop too well.
I don't know it well either. But if you're saying that it's creamy, then it's probably got a lot of oat in the malt bill and potentially even some lactose. So
yes, it doesn't say it's got lactose because the first thing I thought was it was very lactosey, but normally they put that on.
So then it's
but
just
it doesn't.
oats.
So, but it's there is it's certainly very oaty. But I'm getting kind of I'm getting orange peel and the kind of bit of lemon that lemon peel, orange peel, Citra.
That is a very different profile than what I'm drinking. So yes, as a reminder, Strange Fellas, Velvet Porter.
Your second Strange Fellas. So are you desperately trying to get a job there or a sponsorship?
Actually, I once had a beer podcast and a beer newsletter, and I did interview Ian, who's one of the owners of Strange Fellas. Great guy.
Favours for your mates, eh? Okay.
But I do think they're actually they make really good beer, and this one's really interesting. What's lovely about it is it's on the lighter side for what you would expect. So if I told you a beer that's rich, smooth, and has bourbon or bourbon notes in it, you'd be like, oh, God, that's probably an imperial porter. It's probably like
it's an 11%.
Yeah. No, it's only 5.3%.
Really?
Yeah.
Does it actually come across? Because I sometimes find when it's sold like that, it ends up being a quite thin, watery version of. It's like someone took an 11% and just added water.
Went into this expecting it to be like an imperial style porter, like really thick and boozy, you go, oh, it's thin. Now, if you didn't go into that expectation, you would say this is an incredibly flavorful porter because that bourbon note just gives it a nice kick. But I think it's nice and refreshing for a change to be able to drink a bourbon-noted porter that's got rich malty notes that is not going to like put you on your backside immediately. So I'm enjoying it. I think it's nice to have this for a change. I don't think there are enough breweries making really flavorful porters that are on the lighter side. So I'm enjoying it.
Oh, good. I just had that on this one. It's like, you remember those little candied bits of peel that your mum used to put on buns when you were a kid? Like I just got one of those like at the back of the throat. It's just like that. It's really nice. So
very nice. All right. Well, you know what? That's a much nicer thing to think about than what we're all dealing with. I think we'll call it a wrap there for the week, won't we?
Yeah, I think that's we might end up doing another one of these given how crazy stuff is. And
who knows?
Sorry for being so ranty, and I think we both are, but it's just, our job is to distill all of this and to give sensible advice, but we also have an emotional response to this stuff, right? And it's true. And at the moment, it is very hard to distill this down beyond your very sage advice of people just need to literally prepare for anything. Right? This is that moment where you've got the nuclear bunker in the back garden. This is the time to fill it. just in case. Just
Stock
in
up on some
case.
supplies.
Yeah, it's just, buy those extra toilet rolls. It's that sort of thing. Like, this is,
I woke up
what
to
we're
an
into.
earthquake yesterday morning at 5 a.m.
By the way, I'm sorry, you put this thing in this 5 a.m. He puts this thing in the BC team group chat. Oh, did anybody else feel that earthquake? I was obviously awake because I'm in the UK. Of course, nobody else felt it. Nobody else was snowshoeing whilst reading a book at 5 a.m. But of course, you felt it. So I actually think it was more about you being up at 5 than it was about the earthquake.
I was not up being productive. The earthquake woke me from my slumber at 5 a.m.
Of course, yeah. No, you were doing something. I just thought, and I noticed nobody else in the office really said anything. I was like, yes, because they were all asleep. And I thought I just imagined you, in your snowshoes, reading a book whilst writing a podcast or something. And you were like, oh, the world is just shaken. And has anybody else felt it? Of course not, they're in bed. But you didn't feel the one the other week. We've had 2 earthquakes, haven't we?
Yeah. We have 2 earthquakes in BC in the last sort of 2.5, 3 weeks. Who knows? Maybe it's a sign of things. Maybe the world's just gone crazy.
Maybe
Mother
the
Nature's
best
going to sort us out.
maybe that'll take care of the border. It'll just be a massive gash between us and the US, and that can just be the end of it. And then Trump can build a beautiful bridge or whatever. I don't know, but yes, anyway. You're alive. You survived it, so that's good.
So alive, survived to tell another tale, and I think with that we will call it a wrap on this first cheeky half we've done since our second week of going live with the podcast. So
still a long one, but there's a lot to rant about this week.
Lots to talk about. Okay, everyone, we'll talk next week.